All right, we are live. Hello, happy Wednesday, or whenever you're catching this. I'm super excited for this conversation. We are going to be doing another Q&A live with Dr. Mullen of Vytal Health. I've been working with Vytal Health and Dr. Mullen for over 2 years now, and I've shared a lot this summer because what we're going to be talking about today hits very close to home. I've dealt with adrenal issues for many years, but this summer I went through a really, really rough patch, and I'm so thankful to say in a really short period of time, I'm feeling so much better, like 50 to 80 times better, I would say. A lot better. And those periods of time, whether we are run down and sick just for a short period of time, or whether we're facing something like hormonal imbalance or, adrenal issues, thyroid, any of this stuff, it really does make you appreciate your health day to day, because you realize that without that, without your energy, without your health, without that vitality, it's hard to enjoy anything else, hard to be present with anything else. So I am so thankful to be feeling a whole lot better. And here, Dr. Mullen, I think, has joined us. Let me see here. Add as a moderator. I'm wondering if Instagram changed things. Here we go. And see if we can get Dr. Mullen on here. All right. Did it.
I did it.
My biggest issue.
I almost don't know every single time if this is going to work.
Same. And then sometimes too, so then I panic.
So glad to be
here. Oh, we did it. All right. Well, welcome, Dr. Mullen.
Thank you.
A little bit about a brief history of us working together, and just saying, how much better I'm feeling and how grateful I am for that, and how it really makes you appreciate feeling good when you go through seasons of not feeling good. So, yeah.
Yeah, we both had a year, haven't we?
It's been quarter 4, and we're still here. So, yeah. Well, let's get right into the questions, because I know we have a lot of great questions today.
Awesome.
So first off, again, we're talking stress, burnout, adrenal health. To get us started, let's first talk about what exactly is burnout and what is adrenal fatigue.
So that's such an interesting question. So if you go online, or you go to Wikipedia or whatever, and you look up the definition of burnout, it's actually a term that is specific to a workplace situation. And it's interesting because we all use the word burnout across the spectrum. Like, we talk about burnout at work, we talk about burnout in our personal lives, we talk about burnout in so many different ways. But technically, it's a workplace terminology. And it has to do with this state of physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion that is a result of prolonged stress. And I think this is the really key, underlying part, without adequate support resources. So when you talk about work burnout, you're talking about being in a situation where you're under constant stress and you're feeling it emotionally, physically, mentally, but you're not getting the adequate support that you need to be able to overcome that. So the symptoms of that, and we can extrapolate that across the board. You could take that as a work thing. Definitionally, that's the term. There's actually an ICD-10, which is a medical diagnosis code that goes along with the diagnosis of burnout, but it's very specific to workplace, which is interesting. But if you extrapolate that, the symptoms of burnout, whether it's workplace or otherwise, is a sense of a loss of motivation. There is a sense of depletion that increases over time. So as time goes on, every day that goes on that you're feeling this way, you have this feeling of more and more depletion. The behavior that's associated with burnout is you become sort of more detached from everything and cynical, kind of like you just don't see that anything's ever going to get better. And then finally, there's a fatigue component. So this is where I think adrenal fatigue and burnout kind of cross over, is on the fatigue aspect. So if you look at what is adrenal fatigue, which we also call HPA axis dysregulation, which is a fancy way of saying there are 3 glands that are involved in adrenal fatigue. the hypothalamus, master gland, pituitary, just under the hypothalamus in the brain, and then the adrenals. And so there's this conversation that's happening between those master glands and the adrenals that causes it to be HPA axis dysregulation, almost a shutdown in that conversation. That syndrome is also due to chronic stress, regardless of what the support system is or not. And it is a much more biological fatigue. In other words, it is because of excess or depletion of cortisol, which is the stress hormone released from the adrenal glands, that causes adrenal fatigue. So in my mind, if I was going to guess, and I don't know that this is true, but if I was going to guess, most people who have burnout as a diagnosis or manifest those symptoms, they likely also have adrenal fatigue. I can't imagine that you could be burnt out and not have adrenal fatigue, but they are different in that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting definition too, just like about the lack of support and resources, because you can really map that over into life. Again, if you're going through a really challenging season, maybe on a personal front or with family or, with anything, that would
Totally.
Same way.
Yeah.
So.
Almost makes it worse. Like it's the feeling of being alone in it all. That I think the isolation piece, I'm a physician, obviously, and so I'm very close to and understand the burnout that exists in the medical community, but I don't think it's unique to the medical community. I just understand that population. And obviously with COVID, that just got lit up, right? I mean, like the medical profession, not just physicians, but across the board, nurses and other healthcare practitioners, so much burnout. But, I see this in education. I see this in pretty much every type of walk of life that people have. Burnout is a thing. And the lack of support and the lack of community that I think we all experienced during COVID was particularly kind of made everything that much worse.
Yeah. So what are some warning signs of both burnout and adrenal fatigue? I know we're kind of touching on both here. Both signs.
Yeah, so I think if we look at the common things that you might see in both, would be the fatigue piece. So when I see patients with adrenal fatigue, the classic description that I get from people who have some type of adrenal fatigue, and there's 3 different sort of stages of it, but the most common thing that I see and hear is, I'm exhausted, but I'm wired. So this tired and wired thing is really classic. When somebody tells me they're like, I'm so exhausted, but my brain doesn't turn off and I can't sleep at night, that's a classic adrenal fatigue presentation. And then the fatigue piece, when I ask patients, I say, like, is this a mental fatigue or is it physical or is it both? I get in adrenal fatigue that it's both. It feels like the brain is tired, but it also feels like the body is tired. Cortisol is a really important hormone, and everyone kind of points a finger at it and says it's a bad thing, but it's actually an important hormone. It does a lot of functions in the body. If you look at the burnout side, what I think is sort of the most classic thing, besides the all-encompassing fatigue that I would suggest probably arches over both of those problems, adrenal fatigue and burnout, is this behavioral sense of like, there isn't anything I can do about it. I'm not getting any support. I'm on this hamster wheel. It's going nowhere. And that detachment where there's almost like an out-of-body experience that people have when they're burnt out, where they just are disconnected from their own emotions. They're disconnected from other people. They're disconnected from their mission, their values. They just, completely disconnect and become cynical and, like there's no point. That's a classic burnout situation. You can have that in the workplace, but you could also have that in relationships and, across the board, your entire life can feel like that. So those are the 2 big differentiating factors that I would look to try to understand, like, where is this person? How significant? I almost think of burnout as being like an extreme form of adrenal fatigue, where it's just so bad that the person isn't even engaging with getting help.
Yeah, just like a little side note, but I feel like I skip the tired and wired phase. And I just always go to tired and tired. I'm like,
Yes.
but I skip right over to just like, I'm tired all the time. So
Yes, a lot of people don't recognize the tired and wired as being something adrenal, because when you're tired, the most common thing that people do when they're tired is drink caffeine, right? So they'll start drinking lots more caffeine, and then they're actually feeling the effects of caffeine in their body, which is very activating, obviously. But they're still tired behind that, So it's sort of like this roller coaster that they're on.
yeah.
And so you're kind of artificially propping yourself up with caffeine.
Yeah.
Isn't the way to do it, but
And that's something I noticed in my journey, like when it's bad is like having that caffeine, and sometimes you either feel nothing or feel worse. And then I'm like, oh, it's not,
yeah.
not.
Yes.
I know we're going to actually touch on caffeine. So let me just jump to that since we kind of
Yeah.
went. What are your thoughts on caffeine in regards to stress and adrenals?
So it's so interesting. I was just listening to a podcast this past weekend from it was Sanjay Gupta, who's a physician that does a lot of media stuff. He was interviewing Michael Pollan, who's written a whole bunch of books, and Michael Pollan's most recently been into sort of the psychedelic movement and sort of the plant-based behavioral health, altering kind of things. And he just did this really interesting podcast on caffeine. And what we know to be true about caffeine is that it's actually not a not healthy thing to do. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that some caffeine is actually a very healthy thing, and that humans really generally are sort of wired to have a little bit of it. It's when it goes overboard, and you start drinking caffeine a lot more. You start drinking it throughout the day, and you sort of, like I said, artificially propping yourself up. What I see with people who have adrenal fatigue and they're using caffeine to kind of try to overcome it is that when they drink the caffeine, they get a very quick rise in their motivation, and they kind of get activated, and then it's almost like they fall off a cliff real fast. It's almost like that sustained caffeine that is kind of normal for most of us. Some caffeine in the morning, and then we pretty much can get through the entire day. These are folks that are taking in caffeine and then falling off within an hour. So, and then on the back end, they're feeling worse. They're feeling more tired than they were before they did the caffeine in the first place. So it's neither terrible for you or good for you. It's probably a little bit of both. It's good for people who tolerate caffeine. It doesn't make them feel anxious, doesn't affect their sleep if they do that in the morning, and it's sort of a little bit of a get going. But it's not good to continue it throughout the entire day and continue to dose yourself over and over and over. That just creates a situation where you're, I sort of say, like punching your adrenals, right? You're like activating them all the time. So,
yeah. And that is one of the big changes I made after we spoke this summer. We talked about caffeine and had it all together, but having that cup of morning coffee, and then a lot of times I would be dragging during the day. So I'd have like at 11 or 12, I'd have a second coffee.
yes.
And talked about like, let's get rid of that and do something maybe more nourishing. Like there's a lot of the adaptogenic kind of a little, they give you more of that steady buzz, and it's not a lot of caffeine or any at all.
Yeah.
So I that switch, and I feel like that's been really, really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the lower caffeine versions of things can also be helpful. So if you're a coffee drinker, you're getting a lot of caffeine in a cup of coffee. Most of us drink more than a cup. What used to be a cup is not a cup anymore. It's more like two, right? It's like a venti. It's too much. even my mug is like two cups, right? But if you drink something that's less caffeinated, so the classic thing that I like to use tea later on. Again, if you're not sensitive to it, if it's not making you feel anxious and messing with your sleep, because you can brew tea to your liking, in terms of the amount of caffeine. If you just use it, put the tea bag in for the first minute and take it out versus leaving it in there for a really long time, you get a different kind of caffeine amount, but it's still like measurably a lot less than coffee or espresso. So a little bit of green tea, for example, or matcha in the early afternoon or late morning is for many people a nice way to kind of sustain their caffeine, and also just all those phytochemicals and antioxidants, that are in green tea. There are numerous kinds of, health benefits to tea. There's health benefits to coffee too, but health benefits to tea that you're getting when you expose yourself to a little bit of tea every day as well.
Yeah, totally. So thinking of that one as a little more nourishing, and like you're replacing it with something, so you don't feel like you're, just sitting there and you're like, oh, that's, because part of it I think is the ritual as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Just having that mug, especially in the winter, just holding on to something warm we all kind of want that, you know? So yeah, a little bit of tea, or even just like another type of ritual that's not caffeinated. Heating up some water and putting lemon in it, for example, is a really nice way to have a beverage. Or herbal teas that don't have caffeine. You know, those are also a really nice option. Sometimes I'll just brew ginger tea, or I'll brew like a lavender, and just having that sort of hot beverage ritual piece kind of satisfies that and doesn't, you know, give me that huge jolt of caffeine that we don't need.
Totally. Awesome. So then how about some ways to prevent both burnout and adrenal fatigue? We kind of know what to look for now. What are things that everyone can be doing to prevent it from happening?
Mm-hmm. So I think the most important thing across the board for both would be recognition. So recognizing when you are starting to exhibit some of these symptoms, and getting, for example, in the case of burnout, getting help, asking for help, going to your therapist if you have a therapist, or being able to talk to your community, whether that's your work community, your friends, your family, and get support, because I think the feeling alone piece in it is the most devastating and most difficult and probably most damaging part of burnout, because then you're just in a vacuum and you're not getting support. Adrenal fatigue, I think one of the things that I see most oftentimes in people who have adrenal fatigue is they feel like they can push their way through it. Mm-hmm. So I see this a lot in people who are exercisers or athletes, or even not professional athletes, but people who do like triathlons or marathons, where they like to push themselves. It's kind of like their personality, but then they go too far, and they push themselves through. They try to push themselves through the fatigue, and they never stop to rest. So one of the things that I've been working on, I'm not a triathlete, trust me, but I am sort of a compulsive exerciser, and I also am obviously somebody who works really hard in my job, is really allowing for rest, mm-hmm. allowing for time when I am not engaging my mind and my body in something, because that's my default mode, and really spending time doing something that doesn't involve any type of exertion. I'm not trying to solve the world's problems. I'm not trying to run it out. I'm just playing the piano, or I'm, you know, doing something that is relaxing, that doesn't involve a big taxing, you know, amount of time on my adrenals and my brain and my body. But I think the recognition, you know, just understanding when you're tired, if you can, I mean, we have children to take care of and jobs to show up to, but when you can, rest, like honor your body's information that it's giving you, and rest. And if you see it as being somewhat chronic and you're doing the rest and you're not getting better, ask for help, because that's when you can start getting into the adaptogens, you know, looking at other hormonal support, looking at your thyroid. Do you need thyroid support? Those kind of things are hard to do on your own, because they're a little bit more complicated. And I think people just go to the store, they go on Amazon, or they go online, and they just buy something that has adaptogens in it, and it might not be the right thing for them. They should look and see, you know, where am I on the spectrum of adrenal fatigue, and then be able to choose the right supplements, whether they're, you know, help the adrenal glands relax, or they activate the adrenal glands. They kind of need to know where you're starting off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good points there. Yeah, and the rest piece is so interesting, because I struggle with that too. Like, obviously, physical activity, I love it. And I know we had talked about that. And the more that I'm taking, if I can get more weeks than not, I've been getting 2 whole rest days in, and that is so tough mentally. But wow, do I feel really different. And then when I do work out, it's like I can put so much in, and I have like that pep in my step again. So it's really, really powerful to do that. But also I feel like just the mental aspect, and in our society, when I just give myself time to like sit and read a book, or, you know, just do something enjoyable, or like, okay, I am going to watch a TV show. It's like letting go of that guilt that like doing something productive every second of every day.
Absolutely. Like, where did we get that idea? Like, that, you know, mm-hmm. Yeah, we're so industrious, and we feel like we're, you know, unless everything's done, we can't sit down. Yeah, just letting go of that construct and just allowing yourself. And I'm coming at this conversation with a deep sense of owning my own stuff, because I really had to learn that. And I had to learn it by actually being burned out and having adrenal fatigue, and actually going like, you know, if I'm going to be able to take care of other people, I need to be able to do the things for myself that are nourishing and relaxing and resting and rejuvenating. Otherwise, where are we going? Like, you know, we cannot carry on. We could get into days and days of conversation about just how bad it is for our bodies to treat ourselves that way. Like, you know, it's bad for our blood pressure, our hearts, our brains, like everything, you know?
Yeah. Well, and even teaching classes, I've been really, the last couple minutes when we cool down and stretch, sometimes people like will run out the door, and not trying to call them out, but I class, I'm like, take this time. And me too, as I'm doing it, I'm like, you need to reset your nervous system. And like, we have to actually let the muscles relax too, because I started finding that too, even though, like I said, I don't really feel tired and wired. I just feel tired, but I find all that tension in my body. Like I'll head out the door and I'm like, you know, my muscles are so tense. So it's also that skill of like being able to physically relax our muscles and by, or to do that, we have to relax the nervous system. It's like the muscles don't have their own brain. So it is all coming from that nervous system. Just like, can you actually your body and be.
Yeah, we activate and deactivate our skeletal muscle, right? To your point, it's not automatic like our autonomic nervous system, our breathing, our heartbeat, our digestion. That's all happening. We don't control it. But the skeletal muscular system, that is something that we can check in on. And to your point, some people don't feel that they are tired and wired, but their body's feeling it. And so when you check in, you're like, oh my gosh, my shoulders are like here, and you know, my jaw's clenched, and I feel a sort of a dull headache. Those are signs of the wired part. It doesn't have to feel like a thought process. It can feel like a body process.
Yeah. Well, that's how I feel it.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about brain fog. This is something I've experienced, you know, when I'm in the thick of it, it's really rough. Mm-hmm. So what exactly causes it, and how can we reduce brain fog if we are facing that?
Yeah, I think brain fog is a general description for like mental fatigue. So a lot of things can cause it. Obviously, adrenal fatigue, a lot of people have brain fog, but you could have just insomnia, like run-of-the-mill insomnia, and have brain fog. You could have hypothyroidism, low functioning thyroid, and have brain fog. You could have brain fog because you have a toxic level of something, or you're not getting enough of a nutrient that's necessary for brain function. You're drinking too much, or you're using substances that are hard on the brain that cause some thoughts and foggy thoughts. So it depends on where you're coming at it. Like it pays to evaluate, I think, and sort of talk through it with somebody who can help you sort of sort out, like, why is my brain feeling this way? Why do I have this feeling? It's a really unique type of symptom, though. I think people who have experienced brain fog, it's different from just being tired. You know, it's kind of like this is what I would describe it as. It's kind of like a state of your brain moving through like maple syrup. Like it's just like everything is just that much harder to process. And I experienced that pretty significantly last month. I had COVID and I had some prolonged fatigue from that. And the brain fog was significant. And it almost had been like, oh, I forgot how brain fog feels. It's a very specific way of your brain just feeling like it's just not, the processing speed is turned down. Like you just plugged into the wrong plug in the wall, and your computer is just running like so much slower. It's very bizarre, but just addressing the underlying cause. And again, there's many of them. If you're not sleeping though, and you're not honoring rest and you're not honoring sleep, that's a great place to start universally. Work on that. We don't do well on that. So work on that.
Totally. And then I know we talked a little bit about the exercise piece already, but if someone is finding themselves, you know, feeling burnt out, run down, again, either noticing this tired than wired, or just tired and kind of that brain fog.
Tired.
Yeah. How much is too much, or like what are kind of some general recommendations as far as exercise goes?
Yeah, so if you feel, so this is one of the down and dirty mechanisms that I use to try to understand whether exercise is helpful to somebody. And again, in my practice, I measure cortisol. You know, I do salivary testing or sometimes urinary testing and see what the cortisol looks like, because that's really helpful. And a lot of times I think we don't know when to exercise. And so really understanding that diurnal rhythm is helpful. By the way, the best time to exercise is earlier in the day. Later in the day, your body's cortisol is trying to go down, and when you exercise, it goes up. And So it could really be, if you have good adrenal function, it doesn't matter. But if you have adrenal function issues, if you exercise later in the day, it's harder for your body to settle down. But I think one of the things I observe is when I exercise and my adrenal health is good, when I'm done with my workout, I feel more energy. I feel like higher. I feel the endorphins. I feel psyched. I'm like ready to go with my day. When my adrenals are not good, I not only slog through the workout, but I get to the end of it and I feel less, energetic than I did at the beginning. Mm-hmm. So from a very, very sort of, it's not very exact, but from a down and dirty perspective, you can use that as saying like, okay, if you're feeling worse at the end of your workout, pull back. Like pull back on intensity, pull back on frequency, pull back on how much time you're going. Like if you're going for an hour, maybe you need to go, less. I have people who do like heavy hit exercise every day of the week. And, it's just so hard on your body. Your adrenal glands are not aware that we are living in this culture and this society where everything is in abundance and we don't really have the stresses and strains that our ancestors that lived 500 years ago had, but they're still wired to respond that way. So when you are doing heavy exercise, your adrenals are interpreting that to mean like, oh my gosh, we're on the run. Like, when are we going to see food again? What's happening? I'm being chased. And so it's a significant stress response that we're wired for that isn't normal. Mm-hmm. So we have to find that balance between fitness and overexertion and over pushing when it comes to that. Yeah. Even professional athletes and people who train hard for sports, they rest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's such a great message. And I see so much of that, again, like being in the fitness industry and in that world still, and like at the gyms, just people doing way too much, and it's actually so counterproductive. And
yeah, you can't push through it. You cannot push through adrenal fatigue. Full stop. You just can't.
Yeah. And I love that checkpoint of, I really was noticing that again this summer with kind of monitoring what types of workouts to, because I feel like it would depend on like what kind of workout it was.
Yeah.
But really did it leave me feeling depleted and drained, and then I would do less of that and pull back. Or some of them, stuff that was a little bit more gentle, bar, Pilates, that kind of stuff, I would notice like, okay, I feel good. I feel, energized.
That's the key. How do you feel? Listen to your body. Listen to the way that you feel is the best way to assess something. If you're pushing too hard and you feel worse at the end of the workout, that's a message.
Right.
Like, hear it. That's a message.
Yeah. All right. And then kind of switching gears a little bit, but we also had a question about PMDD, premenstrual work disorder. Any ways to naturally treat that?
Yeah. So the understanding of PMDD for the most part is that a lot of people who have that classic PMDD presentation, which is to say in women who cycle, they have a significant drop off of mood or mood changes, whether that's anxiety, depression, some form of irritability that happens in the last 2 weeks of the cycle, and particularly prominently the last week before the cycle. That second half of the cycle is the time in the cycle when progesterone is our predominant hormone of the estrogen and progesterone. So estrogen has its moment in the beginning of the cycle till ovulation, and then progesterone is the star of the second half of the cycle. So obviously I'm a big fan of testing. I want to see testing as a part of the way that people discover whether they really have progesterone problems. But pretty much anybody can try something called chaste tree berry, which is a supplement that you can use that actually elevates your progesterone. And it doesn't do it like taking progesterone. It does it in a very subtle and helpful way. So I love chaste tree berry. It's also called Vitex. The plant or the fruit that it's made from is Vitex agnus castus. And it's a great supplement for PMDD. The traditional medical community has gone after serotonin as kind of its target. So we use Prozac, and there's been other sort of versions of Prozac that we have used for PMDD. But in my experience, this is not a serotonin issue. This is really more often a progesterone issue. And elevating that progesterone gently with a natural product like Vitex or chaste tree can be really, really helpful.
Awesome. That's such a great tip. So then finally, to close love to just go through, as we talked about today, it is really helpful. And I've found both for myself and family and friends that have worked with Vytal Health, just right off the bat, I think it's so reassuring and validating when you know something is off with your body. And all of the things we're talking about today too, they're not, you can't see them.
Yeah.
You know, how, again, feeling isolated with adrenal fatigue, you feel horrible. Like that's how I felt. And it's like, you also don't show it on the outside. So people don't understand that you're struggling every day and feeling physically really rough. So I think it's been so validating when I've worked with Vytal Health to take those tests and know exactly where I'm at. It's like, you're maybe not getting good news, but at least you're like, okay, I see. We know exactly what it is and we can pinpoint it and then start to build a treatment plan around that. Because otherwise, you know, again, the balance of hormones, adrenals, thyroid, all of this stuff, it's so delicate. And so anyway, long-winded.
That's so true. And I think the validation piece is huge. I don't think this can be overstated, to be honest with you, because there's something about having objective evidence of how you're feeling, because we all walk around all the time saying things like, I'm so stressed, I'm stressed out, I feel stressed, you know, and so it's such a common like set of symptoms, you know, we all feel this stress, but who actually has adrenal fatigue and who actually has burnout? It's really great to be able to say, how do I look at my biological markers so that I can understand that this is real? You know, do I really have this? Where am I on the spectrum of the different ways that this presents? And then how can I get it better? Once I have that objective evidence, it's so validating. To your point, I've had patients just cry because nobody, you know, they go to the traditional medical doctor and the traditional medical doctor is like, you know, get more sleep. I mean, it's just totally one size fits all, not helpful advice. Yeah. And absolutely no probing and testing.
Right.
So
very basic blood panel that's not going to hit on any of the things that are going to indicate what's wrong. That's even worse. And I've had that happen in the past where it's like, oh, everything looks good. So then you're like, oh, so I'm crazy and make
yeah. And that's kind of how it happens is, you know, then there's a dismissal, like, we can't find anything wrong with you, so it must be you. And so either here's your antidepressant or, you know, just go home and sleep better and eat better and good luck. You know, the dismissal part I think is very real. I hear that from patients all the time. And to not be believed when it's just that we haven't looked for the right things is really, it's almost like medical trauma in a way to be dismissed that way and say, you know, we don't believe that that's really what you feel. Yeah. We don't believe that that's actually what you're experiencing. I've been through that as a patient. It's a terrible experience. So yeah, finding somebody to dig in with and really have somebody be on your side. You know, you may do adrenal testing and it's not that. It's your thyroid or it's your hormones or it's your gut or it's something else. But figure that out so that you can feel better.
Yeah, totally. And just to circle it back to, again, from personal experience, I think that whole resting thing, or like, I feel like once I got my diagnosis or we talked about my results, it went from like, oh, I probably should rest more to like, okay, I need to rest. Again, I have like we're aware of what's wrong. But I think for people, especially if you are kind of, you know, you're that type A personality and like it's hard for you to relax, I think it does help also to know, you know, where you're at and realize like, oh, this is really serious and I need to rest so that I can get better. And feel.
I mean, sometimes we just need to write you a prescription for rest or for vegetables, you know, like we can use that prescription for, you know, things other than meds because it's powerful. It's saying that I am prescribing for you. I am collaborating with you that you need to rest. And it's medical. It's not just a nice to have, it's a must have.
Right. Totally. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mullen. I love our conversations.
Always fun, always interesting. I could talk to you all day. I think I say that every single time we have these. I'm like, I could talk to you all day.
I know, we definitely could. So if anyone is interested and wants to do a consultation, go on, is it vytalhealth.com?
Yeah, VY, not VI, VYTAL health.com.
Okay, perfect. And they can set up a consultation and go from there. Again, everything is personalized, customized. It's virtual, which is so nice. It takes one thing off your plate. You don't have to leave your home and you will be in very good hands. So thank you again, Dr. Mullen.
Justine.
All right.
Hope you continue to feel well.
Yes. Thank you so much. You too.
See you soon.
Okay. Bye.